Hello students. So my today's class is about ischemic heart disease part 2. Hopefully you have all seen the first part of ischemic heart disease which I discussed in my last class. Today we'll be talking about the second part of ischemic heart disease. In the first part we saw in general the epidemiology, the risk factors, the etiopathogenesis, the different types of ischemic heart disease. We discussed those in detail in the first part. We also talked about angina pectoris in the first lecture. Today's lecture will mostly focus on another important cause, rather the most important cause of ischemic heart disease, that is myocardial infarction. So the learning objectives of today's session, at the end of the session, students will be able to describe the epidemiology, risk factors of myocardial infarction, etiopathogenesis of myocardial infarction, list and describe different types of infarct, describe the morphology of infarct, how to diagnose myocardial infarction, and complications of myocardial infarction. So the initial part, the epidemiology, the risk factors, the etiopathogenesis would be slightly a repetition of what we have seen in the epidemiology and etiopathogenesis of ischemic heart disease, because MI is also a type of ischemic heart disease. If you recall, we started our first lecture with the clinical case of a 68-year man with chest pain brought to emergency room, pain 6 hours ago and severe retrosternal crushing and radiating to the center, complaining of sweating, mild dyspnea, also episode of vomiting, medical history of hypertension and smokes 1 pack of cigarettes per day. On examination, cold, clammy extremities, pulse 92 per minute, regular blood pressure is 160/90. So we started the ischemic heart disease with the case. In the first lecture, we saw how and why the ischemic heart disease occurs, causes of ischemic heart disease. Today we will see further about myocardial infarction, so that we can solve many of the answers you must have already solved in this case, and the remaining we will be discussing as we move ahead. So if you recall ischemic heart disease, it's a coronary heart, also called as coronary heart disease, and it has got it is manifested in 4 ways. Angina pectoris, in which they are stable type of angina, variant and unstable type of angina. And the most important ischemic heart disease is myocardial infarction, of which these 2 are the main types, the transmural infarction and subendocardial infarction. Then we have the chronic ischemic heart disease and the sudden cardiac death. So this angina pectoris we've already seen, and today we'll be discussing about myocardial infarction. We already saw in the first lecture that unstable type of angina pectoris, myocardial infarction and sudden cardiac death constitute the acute coronary syndrome. So, myocardial infarction. Most important type of ischemic heart disease, popularly or commonly known as heart attack. It is a coagulative type of necrosis, or you can call it death of cardiac muscle, and is due to prolonged severe ischemia. It is the single most common cause of death. 20 to 30% of patients die before reaching the hospital. Risk factors, as I said, they will be just, we've already discussed them in detail in the first lecture. Today we'll be just going through rapidly and seeing the few important ones. So age is an important risk factor. It can occur at any age. 10% of cases occur in people younger than 40 years of age, especially if they have risk factors. But of course, the risk is increased in elderly. Sex, we've already seen males more than females because of protective influence of estrogens. Other risk factors like major risk factors like hypertension, diabetes, smoking, hypercholesterolemia, etc. Incidence of acute MI correlates well with incidence of atherosclerosis in that area. Coming to etiopathogenesis, the most important cause of myocardial infarction or pathogenesis is myocardial ischemia or blockage in supply to the myocardium by the coronary arteries. And as in 90% of cases, it is due to coronary atherosclerosis. 10% it is due to non-atherosclerotic causes. All this we have already discussed in IHD, so we will quickly go through these etiopathogenesis. But if in exam you are asked about etiopathogenesis of myocardial infarction, you have to describe in detail what we have described in our general chapter of ischemic heart disease. So just a recap, 90% cases are due to coronary atherosclerosis, in which we already saw in the last class, the basic lesion is a fixed atheromatous plaque, which is an eccentric type of plaque, and some the culprits or potential culprits lead to superadded changes in these plaques such as hemorrhage, ulceration, rupture, and these changes, these superadded changes lead to platelet aggregation, thrombus formation. Also, vasospasm is also stimulated by mediators which are released from platelets. And all these factors lead to myocardial ischemia and myocardial infarction. Just a recap of this picture which we saw in the first class. This is normal lumen. This is fixed coronary atherosclerotic plaque, eccentric plaque. This causes typical angina, but whenever there is acute plaque change, we said at that time also, whenever there is plaque disruption, superadded thrombosis, if it is an occlusive thrombus, it leads to acute myocardial infarction, which is of the transmural type. And if the thrombus is causing variable obstruction, it leads to either unstable angina or acute myocardial infarction, which is of the subendocardial type. So this is thrombus formation due to plaque disruption on a already fixed coronary atheromatous plaque. So this is how it happens, MI. And there are two types of MI, and so the cause is different. The non-sclerotic causes are vasospasm, which may be with or without atherosclerotic narrowing, coronary narrowing, stenosis of coronary ostia, vasculitis. So ischemia due to many causes also can lead to other causes than atherosclerosis. So ischemia due to vasculitis, ischemia due to embolism, which may have come from the left atrium in atrial fibrillation, from vegetation, from bacterial endocarditis, from intracardiac prosthetic material, then hematologic disorders like sickle cell disease, amyloid deposition in vascular walls, lowered systemic blood pressure, all these can lead to ischemia to the myocardium. Then the myocardial demand may be increased either due to hypertrophy of the heart or due to tachycardia or any hemodynamic compromise such as hypertension. So these are the non-atherosclerotic causes which make up 10% of the cases. Now, as we said, the main etiology or pathogenesis is the coronary artery occlusion. What happens when the coronary arteries are occluded? Whenever they are occluded, myocardium is heavily dependent on oxygen for its function. and it gets its supply from the coronary arteries. So whenever coronary arteries are occluded, it leads to functional loss, that is the myocardial dysfunction, the contractility dysfunction. It leads to biochemical changes. This happens because whenever blood supply is reduced, oxygen supply is reduced, this leads to stoppage of the aerobic respiration, and so immediately there is an onset of ATP depletion, accumulation of lactic acid, and leading to reversible and then irreversible injury. Then there are the morphologic consequences which we will see ahead. What are the key events that occur? Key events that occur are within seconds of ischemia or occlusion of blood supply, there is onset of ATP depletion. In less than 2 minutes, the muscle loses its contractility. And how does the ATP reduce? In 10 minutes, it becomes 10% of normal. In 40 minutes, it becomes 50% of normal. And between 20 to 30 minutes, the injury becomes irreversible. So early changes which occur, they are potentially reversible. But as the occlusion continues and is not reversed, it leads to irreversible cell injury. So severe ischemia more than 20 minutes causes irreversible damage to the muscle. So that leads to muscle death, which cannot be revived or retrieved. That is the importance of the initial 20 minutes. And thus restoration of myocardial blood flow very early, very early, within 20 minutes, can prevent the loss of cell viability, because if it is detected early and treated with thrombolytic agents in time, it can be reversed. But ischemia more than 20 minutes causes irreversible damage. Talking about the morphological changes, as we said, ischemia more than 20 minutes leads to death. So myocardial necrosis, that is death of the myocardial muscles, begins within 20 to 30 minutes of coronary artery occlusion. And the myocardium, in the myocardium, the perfusion of the muscle is from the epicardium, that is from the outside to the endocardium, inside the wall of the muscle. So from epicardium to the endocardium. So the subendocardial region is the first to be affected whenever there is ischemia, because it is the least perfused, and so that is why it is most vulnerable to any reduction in blood flow. And that is why typically whenever there is coronary artery occlusion, infarct begins in the subendocardial region of myocardium, because it is poorly perfused. And then with time, if the obstruction is not relieved, the cell death moves from subendocardium to involve the entire thickness of the ventricle. That is why we have two types of myocardial infarction. One is the transmural type of infarction and the other is the subendocardial type of infarction. Transmural infarction is the most common type in 95% of cases. This type of infarction involves, as you can see in this picture, the full thickness of the ventricular wall, and usually is due to complete occlusion of the area's blood supply. This is also called as STEMI type of infarct, that is ST elevation type of myocardial infarction, because on ECG we see ST elevation in transmural infarct. And we already saw transmural infarct when in the figure due to occlusive thrombus, that is complete occlusion of the lumen. The other is the subendocardial type of infarct, which is also called as non-STEMI, N-STEMI. So no ST elevation is seen. This involves the inner one-third or half of the ventricular wall. As I said, this is most vulnerable, least perfused. So it starts from here and gradually with time, it occupies the whole wall of the vessel, converting into a transmural infarct. Talking of types of infarct, some people also classify it like acute infarct and healed infarct. Some classify according to the anterior wall, inferior, anteroseptal, etc. When we talk of morphological changes, there are many factors which affect morphological changes. It depends on which coronary artery is affected, obstructed, severity of obstruction, rate of development, size of vascular bed which is perfused by the obstructed vessels, duration of occlusion, metabolic demands of the myocardium, the collateral blood vessel extent, because at many places the collateral blood circulation takes up the loss and makes up for the obstruction of the coronary arteries, presence, site and severity of spasm and other factors, that is heart rate, cardiac rhythm and so on. Now, location of infarct. Location of infarcts is easy to know if we have knowledge about the areas which are supplied by the major coronary arteries, because we can correlate then the coronary obstruction with their corresponding area of supply. We saw in our first lecture which are the areas of the heart which are supplied by the left anterior descending artery, right coronary artery and the left circumflex artery. So according to their location, whichever artery is obstructed results in infarction of that area. So if we see the left anterior descending artery, this LAD infarct is the most common infarct. 40 to 50% of cases it is due to LAD obstruction, and any obstruction in this leads to infarction in the apex, in the anterior wall of the left ventricle and in the anterior two-thirds of the interventricular septum. The right coronary artery, 30 to 40% cases are due to obstruction of right coronary artery, and whenever there is obstruction here, it leads to infarction in the inferior or basal portion of the left ventricle, posterior portion of the ventricular septum and the posterior right ventricular free wall. Left circumflex artery, it is obstructed in 15 to 20% of cases, and infarct here involves the lateral wall of the left ventricle. So this is, we'll see this location again in a transverse section. This is cut like this, a transverse section of the heart. This is the LAD, left anterior descending. This is the left circumflex, and this is the posterior descending branch of the right coronary artery. This is the left ventricle, this is the septum, this is the right ventricle. So if we see in this figure the distribution of necrosis, so this, as I said, is the LAD. Whenever an LAD is obstructed, it affects the anterior portion of the left ventricle and the anterior portion of the interventricular septum. The left circumflex affects the infarction of the left lateral wall of the left ventricle. This is the branch of the right coronary artery. This affects the posterior part of the left ventricle and the posterior part of the interventricular septum. You can see all this side on the left side, all these infarcts are of the transmural type, which are occupying the full thickness of the ventricular wall. And on this side, you can see they are the subendocardial type, which is not occupying only the inner part of the myocardium. Talking about the microscopic changes, in the initial 0 to 6 hours, there are no important light microscopic changes. What we can see is only stretching and waving of fibers, waviness of fibers at the periphery. And this is because of the forced systolic tugs of the adjacent fibers which are reacting to the infarction. The changes begin from 6 to 12 hours, and the first change that we see is the coagulative necrosis of the myocardial muscle with neutrophilic infiltration. So coagulative necrosis and polymorphs or neutrophilic infiltration is the first change. We see edema in between the fibers, areas of hemorrhage, and myocytolysis, that is vascular degeneration of the myocardial muscles. Starting at this time, this coagulative necrosis and neutrophilic infiltration becomes more pronounced and stays till 72 hours. So, coagulative necrosis with neutrophilic infiltration starts from here and stays till the 72 hours or 3 days. So between 1 to 3 days, what you see is mainly coagulative necrosis and neutrophilic infiltration. After the 3rd day, the neutrophils start getting necrosed and start disappearing, and they are replaced by macrophages which have come there to begin their work of resorption of the necrosed fibers. So after 3rd day or after 72 hours, it is the macrophages which form the main cell in the infarcted area, and fibrovascular response also starts. So 2nd week up to 14 days, we see the development of the granulation tissue, that is fibrovascular response, which goes on increasing, and by 14th day the muscle is removed, neutrophils disappear, even the macrophages start getting reduced, and it is mainly what we see is healing by granulation tissue is what is seen here between 7 to 14 days. By the 3rd week, more and more necrosed muscle is removed and the granulation tissue goes on developing, and now the vessels reduce and there is more ingrowth of the fibrocollagenic tissue. And between 4 to 10 weeks, it is believed at approximately 6 weeks, what we see is mainly the fibrocollagenous tissue, and rest vascularity, macrophages, they are all reduced. This fibrocollagenous tissue is the scarring tissue, which is seen grossly as a thin grayish white fibrous scar. This is what we called as healed MI. This is that phase of healed MI. At approximately 6 weeks, the scarring becomes complete. So this is the sequential changes, the series of changes that occur in the heart infarction. You can see in this figure, this is a transverse section, this is the left ventricle. What you can see is the anterior part of ventricle and the interventricular septum are showing an area of acute infarct. So you can see it is yellowish in color, surrounded by hyperemic border, and more or less it is a transmural infarct occupying the full thickness of the wall. This is again an area of infarct showing the yellow tan soft area. This is a section of healed infarct which may be between 4 to 10 weeks, and you can see this white colored fibrous scarred tissue is seen. So this is a healed infarct. You can see the difference between the acute infarct, which may be red, hemorrhagic or yellow tan in color, and the healed infarct, which is white fibrous scar formation. Microscopically, if we see, this is a 1-day-old infarct. On this side are the normal myocardial fibers. Here you can see slight waviness of the muscle fibers. Now this is from 1 to 3 days, showing coagulative necrosis of muscle fibers. We know what is coagulative necrosis. That is the muscles have retained their shape, but there is loss of nucleus, loss of striations, and along with it what we see is infiltration by the neutrophils. So this is acute infarct from 1 to 3 days, up to 3 days. After 3 days, we know it is the macrophages that come in to resorb the necrosed tissue, and from 7 to 10 days and 10 to 14. So between 7 to 14 days, what we see is response of macrophages and onset of granulation tissue formation. Here you can see development of new vessels, part of granulation tissue. This is the healed infarct with replacement of necrotic fibers by a dense collagenous scar. You can see scar formation. Fibrous tissue is laid down between these are the muscle fibers and these are the fibrous tissue. Only residual few cardiac muscles are seen. So if we summarize the microscopic features, this is the 1 day wavy fibers. Up to 3 days, 1 to 3 days, it is the coagulation necrosis and neutrophils. Then from 3 days onwards to 7 days, it is the macrophages that come in. Then from 7 days to 14 days, that is 1 to 2 weeks, it is the granulation tissue that forms the main feature. And then more than 3 weeks, and what we call it approximately 6 weeks, it is the scarring or fibrosis. Here the collagenous tissue is seen blue in color because this is a special stain, demonstration of collagen fibers by special stain. We all know the mesenteric stain is the stain which stains the muscles red and the collagen blue. So this is summary of the microscopic changes. Remember, up to 3 days, it is the neutrophils. After 3 days, it is the macrophages that come. This was the stain which we were talking of, TTC stain or the triphenyl tetrazolium chloride stain. This is a histochemical stain that can grossly identify infarct within 2 to 3 hours of onset. And it does so because it detects and stains the lactate dehydrogenase enzymes, and the area that is viable is seen as the mahogany brown color, and the area which is infarcted, because there will not be any presence of lactate dehydrogenase in that area, will remain unstained in the slice. What we do, how we do this is, we take the slice of the gross heart and we dip it in the TTC stain, and after taking it out, we can see the normal myocardium is the mahogany brown, and this unstained area shown by the arrow is the infarcted area. Do not get confused with this area. This is a white fibrous tissue. So these are the gross and microscopic changes that we see in a myocardial infarction. Now, whenever there is infarction, there is always an attempt to restore the blood flow to the myocardium and to salvage the cardiac muscle, because we all know time is very important in myocardium. And these attempts are usually done by angioplasty, CABG, etc. And we said that in the initial period, the injury is reversible injury, but if the time goes more than 20 to 30 minutes, the injury becomes a irreversible injury. And whenever reperfusion is tried, if there is a late attempt at reperfusion, it leads to injury which is called as reperfusion injury. That is, it leads to myonecrosis due to the rapid influx of calcium ions and toxic free radical production. And this is demonstrated morphologically in the section by presence of these contraction band necrosis, which are these pinkish transverse colored bands. So these are known as contraction band necrosis. They are thick transverse eosinophilic bands. So these are the changes in the myocardium. But remember, these changes are seen in the heart on gross or microscopy. So these changes are seen only if the patient or the person dies of myocardial infarction, because only after doing postmortem examination we can examine the heart and see these gross and microscopic changes. Now, suppose the patient has come to the hospital with complaints of myocardial infarction. How do we diagnose myocardial infarction in a hospital setting or in an emergency care setting? So diagnosis can be done on the basis of clinical features, ECG changes, and serum enzyme determination. So what are the clinical features that are important? Clinical features, main is the chest pain, which is a severe precordial, substernal, crushing, stabbing, squeezing type of chest pain, which radiates to the arm, neck and back. This pain is unrelieved by rest or nitroglycerin. We've already discussed in angina why this pain occurs. Then patient will complain of profuse sweating, which we call as diaphoresis. Indigestion complaints may be there, that is nausea, vomiting, and that is why sometimes a cardiac pain gets confused. The patient gets confused between a cardiac pain and a pain of epigastric or indigestion. Then dyspnea may be there, apprehension, shock, acute pulmonary syndrome may occur. In 25% of cases, the patient does not have any complaint, any pain. These are called the silent MI, and usually this occurs in patients of diabetes. They may occur in women, old age patients also. So these are the clinical features which all occur due to ischemia and are pinpoint towards a myocardial infarction. ECG changes, we've already said, there are two types, STEMI and non-STEMI, that is ST elevation type of infarcts, which are seen in the transmural type of infarction. Then we have the non-STEMI type of changes, which are seen in subendocardial type of infarct. The other changes would be T wave inversion, deep Q wave, and I think more about ECG changes will be taught to you in your medicine classes. Coming to the serum cardiac markers. What are these serum cardiac markers? They are the myocardial proteins which have entered into the plasma from the irreversibly damaged myocytes. And diagnosis of myocardial infarction is definitely established when blood levels of these cardiac biomarkers are elevated. And the first and the most important of this is the troponin, because it is a very cardiac specific marker. Troponin, it is a new serum cardiac marker. It is a contractile muscle protein present in human cardiac and skeletal muscles, and these are now the most sensitive and the most specific markers for myocardium. They are of two types, troponin T and troponin I. Normal patients, normally they are not detectable, but after an acute MI, the levels of troponin T and I rise at 2 to 4 hours after onset. They peak at 12 to 48 hours and they remain elevated for 7 to 10 days. Another important marker is the creatine kinase. Creatine kinase is present in brain, myocardial, skeletal. There are two types of dimers, M and B. So one is the CKMM, that is present in skeletal muscle and heart. CKBB is mainly present in brain. CKMB is principally found in the myocardium and variable amounts in skeletal muscle. This CKMB begins to rise within 2 to 4 hours of onset of MI, just like troponin T and I. It peaks at 24 hours, but it returns to normal in 48 to 72 hours. It is a sensitive marker, but as you can see, it is present in other tissues, so it is not a specific marker. Other markers are myoglobin, which is the first to be elevated, but it lacks specificity and it returns to normal in 24 hours. Then we have the LDH, which again lacks specificity. There are two isoforms, LDH1 and LDH2. Estimation of their ratio is considered helpful, but they are not used nowadays due to availability of better markers. So right now, troponin is considered to be the best marker. So let us just see this graph in which we can see the time course of serum cardiac markers for diagnosing an acute MI. As I said, the first marker to rise is the myoglobin, and this rises in 1 to 3 hours, peaks at 8 to 12 hours and returns back to normal in 24 to 36 hours. But it is a non-specific marker. The second marker and the most important, most sensitive, most specific marker is the troponin marker. Troponins, they begin to rise at 2 to 4 hours, peak at 12 to 48 hours, remain elevated for 7 to 10 days. The third marker in blue is the CKMB. This rises again with troponin in 2 to 4 hours. It peaks at 24 hours, but it returns back to normal in 48 to 72 hours. So this marker is helpful whenever there is a reinfarction. CKMB is helpful in those cases. And the last marker is the LDH, which is again non-specific, rises after 24 to 48 hours and remains elevated for many days and returns back to normal in 7 to 14 days. So these cardiac markers are the most important for diagnosis of MI. A STEMI infarct with elevated cardiac markers, it stamps the diagnosis of myocardial infarction. Coming to complications of myocardial infarction, 80 to 90% cases develop one or more major complications, some of which are fatal. The important complications are the left ventricular failure and cardiogenic shock. Left ventricular failure, if there is mild dysfunction, then it leads to left ventricular failure and pulmonary edema. But if the dysfunction or contractility of the muscle loss is severe, it leads to shock and is fatal. Another complication is the arrhythmia. Almost all MIs develop abnormal cardiac rhythm. Myocardial rupture is another important complication. It can lead to rupture of ventricular free wall, rupture of septum, rupture of papillary muscle. And this rupture occurs generally due to softening and weakening of the myocardium and is most common during 3 to 7 days. Then comes mural thrombosis and thromboembolism, which is again an important complication. Ventricular aneurysms occur in the affected ventricle, which bulges and leads to aneurysm formation. Then pericarditis, which can be in early stage, it will be fibrinous pericarditis, and as a delayed complication, it will be fibrinohemorrhagic pericarditis, that is the Dressler syndrome, also called the post-MI syndrome. Right ventricular infarction may occur, which is unusual. The extension of the present infarct may occur. New areas may develop infarction. Papillary muscle dysfunction may occur. Progressive late heart failure leading to chronic ischemic heart disease may also occur. Complications will depend on many things, whether the infarct is large, it is anterior located, posteriorly, transmural, and so on. So we can see here a picture of all the complications. This is a rupture in the anterior wall. This is again a picture of rupture. This is rupture of the papillary muscles. This is perifibrinohemorrhagic type of pericarditis. Again rupture. This is a aneurysm formation in the ventricular wall. Therapeutic measures for MI, we know it can be relieved by fibrinolytic therapy as early as possible, angioplasty, PTCA, CABG, antiplatelets, anticoagulants, nitrates, beta blockers, and pain medications. These are all the various type of treatments: angioplasty, balloon, stent, and so on. This is CABG, where the blocked artery is bypassed and by a vessel from another part of the body. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can mail them to me. And have a good day.